Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe and explore. October 12, 2037. For minutes past midnight, the James Webb Space Telescope flagged a persistent pulse coming from the Perseus cluster. It wasn't electromagnetic. It wasn't gravitational. It was something else, a pattern riding beneath both, nested inside fluctuations no one had predicted, timed with a precision that defied thermal drift and quantum noise. One pulse every 11.2 seconds. Perfect. Unshaken. At first, the team thought it was an echo, a harmless loop in deep space. Maybe a binary collapse recorded late. Maybe a phantom reflection bouncing across the heliopause. They logged it, tagged it, and redirected Webb sensors for long-duration observation. A standard protocol. No urgency. Not yet. But the pulse never decayed. Over the next 41 hours, additional harmonics emerged. Each new layer was more compressed than the last, as if the signal wasn't just repeating, but condensing, folding inward. Spectral analysis ruled out quasars. No redshift drift. No isotropic bleed. Instead, the harmonics matched recursive primes, mathematical structures embedding inside frequency. Not once. Not twice. 21 independent confirmations across Webb's spectrograph. It didn't act like a signal meant to be received. It acted like something that had been waiting to be found. The anomaly was logged as K7362. Internal shorthand shortened it, signal K. A full systems shift was ordered. Webb abandoned its exoplanetary observation cycle and began a continuous scan of the source coordinate. Infrared resolution intensified. Imaging drifted toward submillimeter scale. The anomaly began to take shape, barely perceptible at first, a kind of curvature where light behaved unnaturally. What began as a heat blur resolved into a contour, then a shape, then absence. Not an object, but occlusion. A blind spot that resisted modeling. No diffraction halo. No gravitational tug. The field around it warped, but not with mass. Something else was curving light. Analysts expected an elliptical orbit, a rogue body, something that would conform to known equations. Instead, they got silence. The occlusion moved, but not in accordance with Newtonian frames. It didn't drift. It pivoted, holding position relative to the cosmic microwave background, not local systems. Its edge was near perfectly spherical, but its gravitational lensing was asymmetrical, bent inwards where it should have bent out. For 13 days, Webb observed. The shape darkened. At 2.3 microns, the background starfield began to erase, pixel by pixel, as if the region itself was selectively absorbing data. As if observation wasn't just passive, but provoked a reaction. 2 weeks into observation, a narrowband null appeared, an absence in the spectrum that should not exist. A literal hole in wavelength distribution, centered around a frequency coinciding with the Planck temperature decay curve. This had no precedent. It violated thermodynamic expectation. Instruments were recalibrated. No error was found. Every measurement came back clean. Every measurement came back wrong. At mission control, the question was raised behind closed doors. What kind of phenomenon manipulates observation without emitting force? What occupies space but generates no mass signature? An emergency consult with theoretical teams across Geneva, Tokyo, and Canberra produced only a provisional term, non-Keplerian shadow. A placeholder. It wasn't orbiting. It wasn't accelerating. It wasn't behaving. Yet the signal pulsed on. One by one, Webb's subsystems began reporting statistical drift. Star trackers flagged off-axis discrepancies. Cold mirrors registered phantom heat. For 3 seconds, the telescope's onboard atomic clock ran outside universal time. They shut down external data links to prevent public mirrors from querying the anomaly. The observation logs were moved to secure quantum channels. Access was sealed. No press releases. No mission briefings. No citations. The signal's waveform was mapped. Its structure mirrored no known communication protocol. It didn't repeat exactly, but it evolved with each observation cycle, growing in complexity. Not conscious, not intelligent, but unmistakably intentional. The final interpretation: this was not noise. This was not natural. This was not random. The pattern was embedded in spacetime itself. This is when NASA initiated Quiet Protocol Theta. In the months that followed, the telescope's archival systems were mined for correlation. Not for confirmation. For pattern. Analysts weren't searching for a match to the anomaly, they were searching for its fingerprints. Deep field surveys from 3 years prior showed nothing unusual. The same celestial backdrop. The same redshift stratification. Until the filters were adjusted. Not by wavelength, by angular periodicity. Across dozens of archived sectors, a recurring occlusion appeared, each one slight, each one dismissed at the time as photometric artifact or transient obstruction. Dust perhaps, a minor alignment with uncharted debris. But the placements were too ordered. The contour of each shadow matched another taken months apart from a different angle in a different galaxy. That should have been impossible. The shadow was partial. Not total eclipse. A smothering, not a cut. Soft but surgical. The occlusions weren't shaped by mass or matter or motion. They followed no orbit. They lacked diffraction fringes. Their silhouettes carried no gravity. They erased light without interacting with it. A full spectrum audit was authorized under encryption. 52 independent image sets were examined. The occlusions repeated, not in form but in proportion. Each scaled in identical ratios regardless of depth or lensing or relative velocity. Shapes that retained angular fidelity across expansion space. That meant they were positioned to resist cosmological drift. That meant placement. That meant intention. Word spread in quiet rooms. No announcements. No emails. Just private permissions extended to names that required no introduction. One of them requested raw telemetry access without time delay. Not for analysis. For modeling. What emerged from that work was not a picture, but a boundary. He argued that these shapes weren't built. Not placed. They were resonances. Formations not engineered, but inevitable. Like standing waves, but in gravitational curvature. Attractor fields, he called them. Spatial traps formed under rare entropy conditions. Temporary wells of alignment, formed not by cause, but by conditions. Left alone, they collapse. Observed, they persist. His proposal was laughed at in the first meeting. Not because it lacked logic. Because it lacked precedent. The data didn't care. Across the occlusion sites, gravitational echo mapping detected inertial discontinuities, ripples where nothing had moved, as if space had braced for weight and never received it. One site in particular revealed a more detailed pattern. Not just an absence, a contour, hexagonal symmetry at interstellar scale. Not reflective, not refractive, no emissions, but when mapped in reverse gravimetrics, the shape aligned with known biosignature regions logged 5 years prior. Each of those biosignatures had since vanished. No message, no debris, no trace of extinction. The spectral data simply went flat. Dead atmospheres where there had been methane variance and chlorophyll peak. Cold oceans where there had been thermal agitation. The telescope had seen the silence before it was named. Interpretations began to diverge. Some believed the occlusions were remnants, failed constructs from a time before matter had differentiated. Others argued for topological defects in the expansion field, echo scars from the inflation epoch. But the scaling ratios, the resonance fields, the image artifacts, they whispered of something that wasn't gone. Something that didn't need to be present to leave a mark. More images were unearthed. Some had been archived improperly. Some weren't in the official index at all. Each one revealed another instance of that impossible absence, hovering at the threshold of perception, unclaimed by any law, unanchored by any mass. Shapes made not of substance, but of subtraction. They didn't block light. They withheld it. On the final day of observation before the blackout, Webb's long-range scope was tasked with one more sector. What it recorded could not be processed by onboard compression. The frames stalled, overloaded not by data quantity, but by symmetry. The shadow repeated, again and again, always in ratio, always where light had once revealed the presence of life. The anomaly wasn't alone. The paper never made it past internal circulation. It wasn't rejected. It was sealed. Not for its danger, but for its implications. In 18 pages, the author proposed a mechanism buried in the physics of the early universe. Not an object, not a structure, but a process, embedded, dormant, patient. He called it a self-regulating entropy threshold, a state-dependent phenomenon that emerges not at the molecular level, but at the informational. It doesn't observe matter. It observes structure. When certain alignments of organization emerge, the system becomes unstable. The correction is not explosive. It is surgical. The correction erases without rupture. The correction deletes intention before it defines itself. Archived biosignature candidates, planets once flagged for atmospheric disequilibrium, water volatility, photosynthetic gas ratios, were re-examined using the telescope's long-range telemetry. Of the 47 catalogued, 31 were reclassified as non-viable. Not because the signals had degraded, because they had reversed. Methane variance collapsed. Oxygen drift stabilized. Spectral lines showed cooling. Life signatures didn't fade. They snapped to baseline. A shutoff, not a decay. The search for radio emissions confirmed the pattern. 3 systems had transmitted background noise consistent with pre-industrial planetary chatter. Short-wave bursts, signal flares, compression artifacts buried in the carrier waves of stars. None of it remained. The stars were unchanged. The planets were mute. A statistical impossibility across that span of time. Unless it wasn't time. Thermal signatures on 2 of the re-examined worlds suggested something more than cooling. Their albedo had increased. Reflectivity had stabilized. Surfaces once marked by thermal variance showed uniform emissions. That shouldn't happen to rocky planets. Not naturally. Not this soon. The telescope's infrared logs revealed something worse. Certain regions on those planets were ejecting infrared profiles that ran counter to ambient background. Instead of increasing entropy as expected, they registered negative entropy gradients, zones where the energy state was not diffusing, but aligning. The term entropy reversal was whispered, then written. Not in journals, not in press, but in internal memos marked unreadable without clearance. One of those memos described the readings in plain language. Matter was not breaking down. It was rebuilding. Not through biology. Not through replication. Through revision. A planetary surface reshaping itself without external energy input. Erosion undone. Craters restored. Sediment stacks reversed layer by layer. Another region showed atmospheric isotopes climbing backward up their decay chains. Oxygen returning to less oxidized forms. Radioisotopes stabilizing without half-life progression. The temporal sequence of physical events had inverted. Time, in pockets, was no longer a direction. It was a tool. One applied with precision. The correction wasn't destroying life. It was unmaking its trace. Not as punishment. As containment. This led to the threshold model. A framework built on energy and arrangement. Not all biology triggered the effect. Not every signal disappeared. The change began when a biosphere exceeded its own inertia, when it began to alter its environment faster than it could absorb the change. That's when the measurements shifted. That's when entropy froze. That's when signals died. The threshold was never fixed. It scaled. But its result was constant. As if the universe tolerated life only below a certain noise level. Above it, the process was not sustainable. Above it, correction began. There was no beam, no weapon, no trace of intervention. The reversal was not directed at species. It was directed at progress. A system cannot crash if its feedback is contained. That was the unspoken thesis of the paper. The mechanism was not hostile. It was indifferent. It did not target. It filtered. It wasn't intelligent. It didn't need to be. The rules had been seeded into the vacuum itself, set in motion at the beginning, waiting, not for defiance, for pattern, not for intent, for imbalance. They gave it a name, not to own it but to limit it, the cosmic filter, a term that sounded dramatic but was chosen to hide the deeper recognition that it wasn't a barrier, it wasn't an opponent, it was a firewall. The signal, the occlusions, the entropy shift, none of it was linked to life's origin. That was the assumption. Observation after observation had been filtered through that premise, that the anomaly was a response to what life became, not where it began. That assumption didn't survive contact with the biosignature data. In a separate initiative, infrared spectral scans across multiple exoplanets yielded a quiet pattern. Not one anyone noticed at first. Too faint, too dispersed, until someone aligned the datasets not by system, not by age, but by chemistry. Atmospheres separated by light millennia bore the same residues. Not approximate, not similar, but precise. Identical distributions of amino acid precursors. Same ratios. Same chirality. All leaning left. The same molecular bias found in Earth's early oceanic sediment. The same clustering patterns in early ribonucleotide scaffold. No statistical model supported convergence. Not with that level of fidelity. These worlds had never touched, had never shared light, but their molecules matched. None of these planets had advanced biology. Most were sterile. Some were post-thermal. One had lost its magnetosphere. Yet each bore the same prebiotic fingerprint. Same chains. Same decay curve. Same asymmetry. They weren't evolving. They were echoing. Cross-system analysis revealed the second fracture in the model. Comets sampled in the infrared, 3 systems apart, bore a single repeating molecule. Organic, carbon-based, structure intact. Not bonded into chains, not interacting with its environment. It served no role in known biochemistry. No receptor pairing. No metabolic path. It didn't encode anything. No genome. No message. Just shape. Coiled and dormant. It should have been discarded. Noise. Contaminant. But the spin ratio of its carbon atoms pointed elsewhere. The isotopic weight was unbalanced. Too clean, too stable. It hadn't formed in stellar nurseries. It hadn't crystallized from random bonding. It had been assembled. In one of those comets, trapped deep beneath the crust, the same molecule was found again. Layered. Repeating. Not a culture. A storage. Not for replication. For delivery. The Oort cloud probe confirmed it last. The same structure. In a fragment older than the planet it orbited. It wasn't enough for a conclusion. But it was too exact for coincidence. The term directed panspermia had always been controversial. Romanticized in media. Dismissed in policy. No intelligence implied, just matter scattered on cosmic winds. A biological shrug. But this was different. Not random seed. Not passive drift. This was placement. Distributed intentionally across systems, across eras. No code. No control. Just presence. The question wasn't who. The question was why. If life was placed, not emerged, then placement had a purpose. Not survival. Not spread. Something else. A message was found. Not in journals. Not in publications. An unsent draft saved on a secure node, never forwarded, never acknowledged. A final hypothesis. Life was planted as a test. A trigger. And every time it gets too close to waking up the universe, the firewall activates. In its final days before shutdown, the telescope locked onto a region deep in Carina Sagittarius. Coordinates flagged months earlier but shelved in priority cycles. Not an object. A deviation. one that refused to stabilize. Observers didn't expect much. A mass anomaly near a black hole, another gravitational asymmetry to catalog. Instead, they found motion without origin. Matter in proximity to the black hole wasn't falling. It was being drawn, yes, but not in the way matter yields to gravity. It was accelerating inwards while increasing in temperature, without compression, without collision. The light around it did not redshift. It blue shifted. Photons gained energy as they approached the event horizon. The closer they came, the younger their signature became. Time reversed, not by illusion or lensing, but by thermal regression. The field models failed. A black hole should evaporate over eons through Hawking radiation, shedding mass slowly, invisibly. This one did not radiate. It absorbed. Not just matter. Not just energy. But disorder. It consumed entropy itself. A thermodynamic reversal that defied every simulation. Hawking radiation was not just absent. It was inverted. The equations had no space for such behavior. This wasn't decay. This was convergence. Heat bled backward into cold. Vibration stilled. Probabilities collapsed inward. The region acted not like a furnace, but like a lock. A term emerged, not from theory but necessity. Reversed Hawking radiation. A condition where the black hole didn't lose information, but harvested it, extracted it. From the vacuum, from the field, from causality. A hole that didn't break things apart, only rewound them. It should have stopped there. It didn't. A burst followed. Not light. Not particles. A surge of stress in the quantum structure of space. Not noise, not signal. A ping. The telescope's detectors weren't built for it, but the instruments caught the echo. Recursive, fractal, folding in on itself. The signal didn't propagate from the black hole. It reflected from somewhere closer. When they traced the delay, they found the origin. Not Carina. Not the outer solar system. Not a distant point lost in drift. The signal had bounced from Earth. Or rather, from where Earth had been. 13,000 years ago. Triangulation confirmed it. The echo mapped a delay consistent with pre-Holocene light paths. A return pulse, caught by the black hole and sent back across a corridor not made of matter, but of state. The data fold was incomplete. Damaged. But one frame was preserved. The last image web ever recorded. It was not a star. It was not a planet. It was Earth. No satellites. No city lights. No artificial signatures. A cradle untouched by metal or fire. Clouds unscarred. Oceans uninterrupted. A planet held in perfect isolation. But the image did not match telescope orientation. It did not align with any live trajectory. The frame came from an impossible angle. From within. The curvature of the horizon suggested an origin point beneath the Van Allen belt. Atmospheric hue indicated pressure gradients no satellite could survive. The quantum watermark embedded in the data timestamped it. Not to the current mission date, but to an epoch when no human civilization existed. The resolution was not from optics. It was from interference. The image had been generated by differential subtraction. Not taken. Extracted. It had been observing us before the first fire was lit. Before the first word was spoken. Before the species could comprehend what it meant to be seen. The shutdown was silent. No press conference. No farewell. Just a timestamp, an error code, and a single-line statement issued to every outlet in the registry. System failure. Power irregularities. No recovery expected. The real shutdown had already happened. 2 days earlier, data relays were severed. All bandwidth rerouted to secure fiber buried beneath Langley and Geneva. Files tagged with public clearance were overwritten. Encrypted payloads were exiled to machines with no public interface. The uplink logs were erased. Not flagged. Not hidden. Removed. As if they'd never existed. A program code resurfaced in the internal registry. One never acknowledged, never funded, never linked to any telescope mission. Obscura. It wasn't a project. It was a lock. A set of nested triggers bound to predefined data type. Not content. Structure. The moment that pattern was recorded, the moment the signal fell into coherence, the program acted. Authority was never consulted. Authority was never needed. The last internal message traced to the observatory carried no coordinate, no references, no units, only a single line. We didn't trigger it. We were just next in line. There were no follow-up, no return pings, no attempts to re-establish contact with the array. Those with access moved laterally. Into thermal labs, into magneto-optical protocols, into budget line items mislabeled as communications redundancy. The anomaly was never mentioned again. Not officially. Not in peer-reviewed literature. Not in the corridors where such matters are reduced to math and stripped of fear. But the conclusions were already drawn. The signal wasn't a warning. It never tried to stop us. It never issued demands. It simply arrived. It waited. It observed. The structures weren't weapons. Nothing was destroyed. No beam. No explosion. Just omission. Shadows that did not darken but erased. Not violent. Not defensive. Just subtractive. The filter wasn't an accident. It operated across time. Across space. It did not seek. It did not react. It corrected. And only when life moved beyond a threshold it could not tolerate. Every model had assumed life was fragile. Life was accidental. But what if life was the error? Not in biology. In symmetry. A presence that disturbs the silence, that modifies probabilities, that introduces noise into a state trying to remain unbroken. We thought we were decoding the universe. We were being evaluated by it. Life is the unstable variable, the unpredictable term in an equation trying to resolve to zero. It wasn't what Webb saw. It was what saw Webb. Thank you for watching and sticking with me to the end. Now, if you believe humanity deserves a future among the stars, do subscribe now. Only those who'd abandon Earth to its fate will scroll past.